Alright guys, welcome to RC Mojo. This week, while we're waiting for some electronics for the bullhead, we're going to look at another truck. Here we have the FTX Outback XC. Much like the rest of the Outback range, it's a rebadged RGT. In this case, the RGT 136161. Catchy name. But if you're in the UK, you might as well just get the FTX, as cost-wise it's not too much more and is usually available with next day delivery. So the Outback and the Outback 2 are 1/10 scale, the Outback Minis are 1/24 scale, and this one is somewhere in between at 1/16 scale. In theory, it should be somewhere near the same size as the WPL trucks. I bet there's somebody at FTX that really wish that they called the 1/24th Outback the Micro instead of the Mini. It would have made it easier to separate the sizes with Micro, Mini and the full-size Outback, rather than sticking XC right in the middle. A quick look at the vitals before we open it up. Most of it's just what you would expect for a scale truck. It's ready to run, of course, which has its pros and cons. There's an all-metal gear reduction between the motor and the centre gearbox, which is nice, but I'm not sure if the rest of the gears are metal though. We've got oil-filled dampers, which is rather good to see. It comes with a 7.2 volt NiMi, which will be enough to get you going, and a proper little hobby wing ESC, which is great. Other than the lights, the rest of the list is really just filler. It's exactly what you'd expect from a 1/16 scale truck. And on the other side, there's some nice pictures and details. All really good stuff for a retail store. There's plenty to get your attention. All of that isn't what we're really here for though. We want to see the truck. And well, it looks like a truck. Actually, it's quite a good looking, almost Land Rover. Just far enough away to avoid legal issues. But we'll have a closer look at that in a minute. The radio isn't too bad. My only real gripe is the wheels are hard plastic, which just doesn't feel very nice. I'm thinking with wet, cold hands it might be a bit of a struggle. Maybe we can 3D print a new wheel and use a foam tyre. Otherwise it's a bit more than your basic transmitter, because it's got 4 channels, so we can operate the lights. Very nice. For power it needs 4 AA's, which of course aren't included, but that's okay because you can pick up a set just about in any shop. With the truck removed from the cardboard, we've got one more accessory to look at, the USB charger, which I'm sure would work okay, but I'd really suggest not bothering with it. If you're into RC for more than just the one truck, a proper hobby charger is definitely the way to go. If nothing else, the website suggests it's going to take 180 minutes to charge the battery from flat, which really isn't going to be any fun. I was recently asked which charger to get, and while things change all the time with what's available, I'd suggest a good old 4-button charger with mains and 12 volt input that can charge NiMi and LiPo. Something like the Overlander VSR Mini if you're in the UK. It'll do everything you need for typical crawlers and even some speedy trucks, but only up to a point. I'll have to do another charger video at some point, as my last one is a little bit out of date being pre-LiPo. Anyway, enough on the charger, let's look at the truck. The body is your standard Lexan type shell with plastic bits attached. It's very close to looking like a scale Defender pickup, but just far enough JLR won't come after them. It's attached with 4 body clips, and if we lift the shell, lots of wires. It could really do with a tidy up, but it's got the indicators and headlights all wired up ready to go. Moving the camera a bit, we can look at all the bits. We've got a nice little hobby wing ESC which has a Dean's connector, not an oddball non-standard one, which is good. I think I'd rather have an XT30 or an XT60 to match my other trucks, but Dean's is far better than you might usually expect. The battery is an 1100 mAh 6-cell NiMi. Not great, but it'll do what we need it to. I'd rather have a LiPo in there, but I think NiMi is probably a bit safer for the target market, so it's fair enough. On the other side of the chassis we have the receiver, which at one end has your usual servo connections. On the other end though is another bank of 2-pin connections for the lights. You see, the receiver has a basic built-in light controller, which is great to see. Not all of them are used on this setup, but it's got your headlights, tail lights and reverse among others if you want to wire them up. We'll have to see what the limitations are, but I really like it as a solution for RC lighting. So that's the basic first impression bit done. Let's have a quick look at the paperwork and turn everything on. First out the bag, we've got a little bag with some extra body clips, which is nice, and some spacers for the dampers, also nice. We've got the long body posts for the non-pickup version of the body, which is good to have, and then we have the manual for the transmitter. Now I'm guessing from the slightly odd English, it's from the OEM rather than FTX. It's one of those where you have to read it 3 times to get the gist of what you're supposed to be doing. Interestingly, it's far more of a radio than you'd think just by looking at it. As mentioned, it's 4-channel, but it's also got a menu system to set up other things too. I should think it's probably preset for the model, so I'm not going to dive in just yet, but it's good to see a radio with a bit more to it than your typical RTR 2-channel. Moving on to the FTX manual, we find lots of detail and lovely diagrams. Now I must say, all the FTX trucks I've come across recently have had really good manuals. Every so often an odd translation leaks through, but overall they're very clear and have enough detail to sort most issues if you're not confident on your own. But here at RC Mojo, we don't read the manual unless we really need to, so let's do what most people are going to do and turn it on and hope. The transmitter uses 4 AA's which go in at the bottom. At the top there's a sliding power switch which we need to turn on before the truck. On the truck itself we need to plug in the DINs on the battery into the ESC, pop the body on. Now if we were going to go and actually run it, we'd clip the body clips back in too, and then turn on the switch. And there we go, we get some beeps, so it's doing something. And at the front, well, the headlights are flashing, but the truck seems to be working. We've got the steering, which also turns on the indicators. The throttle works, but reverse does seem a little bit sensitive. At the rear, oddly, the 2 LEDs are the indicators. I really would have thought they would have wired them up to the brake lights, but there you go. It's still far more of an interactive setup of lights than you get with most other trucks. As for the flashing headlights, I completely missed there's a 3-position switch at the top of the grip. A quick look in the FTX manual and the penny dropped. Sometimes they are useful. In the leftmost position the headlights are off, in the middle they flash, and right keeps them on solid. Very nice. The channel 3 button simply toggles the hazards on and off. Very cool. Driving the truck up and down the bench is quite promising. The gear train sounds very nice and smooth. But that reverse is definitely a bit sharp. There's one more thing to sort out quickly while we've got it all powered up. Now it's critical to set up the steering endpoints. If you don't, there's a fair chance the steering servo is going to give up pretty quickly. Under the cover on the transmitter, there's 4 knobs. The bottom left is the steering endpoint adjustment, or EPA. As the name suggests, it's there to limit how far the steering servo can move. Right now, at full lock, the poor little servo is moving the wheels all the way, then bending the front of the chassis. It's nice it's got the torque to do it, but it's not really healthy. We need to turn the EPA down until the servo just moves the wheels end to end without stressing. It's a simple thing, but quite often overlooked. It comes up with just about every RTR truck. Even the likes of Traxxas need checking. So there we go, that's a quick look at what you're getting into with the Outback RC or RGT 136161. Before we go though, let's compare it to some other trucks just to get a feel for the size. First of course is a WPL, WPL being the king of cheap and cheerful. It's 1/16 like the FTX, so it should be quite similar. Now the body is a bit smaller, but not far off. As far as the chassis goes, the width is almost exactly the same, which is good, but if we compare the wheelbase, it is slightly longer. Not a bad thing as such, but it is going to make swapping the body on the FTX a little bit more tricky than it really should be. Next, since I reckon people with the Outback Mini and similar looking to get a bigger truck might be going for an XC, let's compare. Sliding the Mini in so it's lined up with the back of the XC, there's quite a size difference. To be almost exact, the XC is about 1.5 minis in length, which is odd, as I think if the 1/24 scale of the Minis was accurate, surely the XC would be 1/12. If nothing else, it just shows how inconsistent the scales of RC trucks are. They're always all over the place. And now to round things off, we'll compare with a Traxxas TRX4, which is of course 1/10 scale, although a slightly longer wheelbase at 324mm rather than the typical 313. Again, the scale doesn't quite add up, but what can you do? The only real accurate thing we can do is say the XC plus 2 sideways minis equals 1 TRX4. The important thing though is that the XC is more or less right in between a typical 1/10 and 1/24 scale truck. Now why is that important? Well, it makes the trails and obstacles fun again. I like to think of the different scales as changing the size of the world rather than the truck. That obstacle, which might just be a tree root, is no problem for the TRX4. The XC might need a bit more thought to get through, and of course with the Mini the route is probably going to be half the height of the truck. Having the different size trucks keeps things fresh and interesting, especially right now when we're not really supposed to be travelling around. It really makes you have to relearn all the lines and paths. Now, normally I'd move on to some outside footage for a full test run, but I'm still a bit short on content, so I'm going to save that for next week. This clip though will have to do for the time being, so think of it as a teaser. As always then, thanks for watching, like if you like, subscribe if you haven't, and leave a comment if there's something on your mind. Bye guys!